The Glorious Booth by Charity Macaulay. The overwhelming boredom of my 9-year-old self was the downfall of my innocence. As I sat under my dad's booth, watching the feet of homeschool moms and dads looking for new ways to educate their children, I could only wish I had the freedom of leaving. Enough was enough, I thought to myself while putting down my Kindle that replayed the same games over and over again. It was the second day, and I still had yet to endure the last and final third day, so I decided to go explore the building to distract myself. I waved goodbye and started on my adventure, regret following close behind. As I wandered, I felt my head begin to spin, my mind rush, and my face go blank. So many books, I thought to myself. Lifting my weary head, I journeyed on, hoping for something exciting to appear. I gave up hope and began to start walking back, with my head down, my hopes crushed, and boredom now raging. I began to walk back when out of the corner of my eye I saw a booth. Not an ordinary booth. This booth was big, and had aisles and aisles of toys and fidgets to play with. But the one thing that caught my eye was a container of glow-in-the-dark putty. I ran as fast as I could to ask my dad, owner of a successful booth, for money to get the putty, but was humbled by the most confident no I had ever heard in my life. The sound echoed in my head as I felt my body sink to the floor, but I couldn't take no for an answer. I found myself wandering up and down the aisles, sad and disappointed as I fantasized of taking the putty back to the booth. Then suddenly, like a light bulb, I lit up with excitement because I had just come up with the best idea I had ever thought of. I would simply borrow the putty till the last day and just put it back on the shelf, so that way I could get what I wanted without really stealing it. I skipped back to the booth and grabbed my blue purse with silver hearts on it. As I ventured back to the glorious aisles, I started to feel my heart sink into my stomach the closer I got. "What is this?" I asked. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I persuaded myself. I had already committed in my mind, so I couldn't back down. I scouted up and down the aisles, then finally the opportunity arose. I quickly grabbed 2 containers of putty, stuffed them into my purse, and walked away, leaving no trace of evidence. My heart was racing as I slowly walked back to the booth, trying not to act suspicious. I pulled out the putty and persuaded my dad that nice people gifted them to me because they saw how bad I wanted them. The look on my dad's face made me question whether or not he believed me, but all he said was, "Cool." I opened the putty and began to play the day away, but I noticed I started to feel fatigue. Finally, this long and adventurous day came to an end. As we left the convention center to head back to the hotel, my dad decided to reward me with food and ice cream. We laughed and had a good time, but with every bite of food, every bite of ice cream, and every sound of laughter, I felt more and more guilt for what I had done. Once we returned back to the room, getting ready to go to bed, I dreaded the thought of having to go back there the next day. We finally fell asleep with the help of a movie to distract myself, when all of a sudden I was harshly awakened with the worst nausea I've ever felt in my life. Was it food poisoning, the flu, or some other deadly disease? The questions went on as I ran from the bathroom back into bed, but deep down I knew it was the overwhelming feeling of guilt. I knew what I had to do, even though I dreaded it. I woke up my dad. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" he questioned. My eyes began to water as I started to get the words out. "I took the putty." There was a moment of silence, and then my dad softly said, "I knew. I just wanted you to be honest." The embarrassment showed on my face as my dad said, "Get some sleep. You will tell the owners what you did and pay for it tomorrow." I cried myself to sleep, full of shame and embarrassment, but also felt relief and gratitude by the love and honesty of my dad. The next morning we quietly got up and were ready to go. My heart began to race as we drove, knowing I would have to confess what I had done and deal with the consequences of my crazy idea. We arrived and walked inside. I avoided the topic completely in hopes it would slip my dad's mind, but with my luck, it didn't. After we settled at his booth, we walked over to the once glorious booth. A tall figure towered over me with a long white beard as his smile defined his wrinkles like cracks in the wall. He asked, "How can I help you?" I imagined myself running away as fast as I could, but I knew I needed to face this. My dad told him, "My daughter has something she would like to say." My face turned as red as a tomato as I stared at the ground. I quietly confessed and handed him the money to pay for the putty. The owner, in shock, took the money but told me to keep the putty. He also told me to be grateful that I had a dad that will hold me accountable for my actions. I thanked him and apologized, and he forgave me. As we walked back to the booth, every step felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. Although I still felt guilty and ashamed, my dad comforted me, telling me to learn and not do it again. I felt as lucky as a leprechaun. I left the booth behind that day with more than just putty. I also left with a reminder to not so easily fall into temptation and to have self-control. I knew I never wanted to feel the way I did that night, and I knew how lucky I was to have loving and caring people in my life. When we confess our sins to God in a humble and vulnerable way, He forgives us and lifts that burden off of our shoulders. I laugh about the story now, but if I hadn't taken the putty, I would have never learned these valuable lessons when I needed to. The end. Oh my gosh.